Welcome back to the CSC Garage. In this episode, I'm going to show you just how easy it is to remove and reinstall the rear wheel on your SG250. Let's get started. Removal of the rear wheel is very simple with a few tools. We're going to use a 12mm wrench, 13mm wrench, 18mm wrench, and a 19mm wrench. We're also going to use a small jack so that we can utilize the center stand. I've got this SG250 on the center stand. I'm going to jack up the front just enough so that the rear wheel comes down. That way I don't have to hold the weight of the rear wheel when I try to remove or replace the axle. So I'm going to use an 18mm on the left side of the motorcycle to hold the axle stationary, and then the 19mm to remove the axle nut. Once I get the axle nut off, I'm going to put slack into the axle by loosening the adjusters. I'm going to do that by breaking free the 13mm nuts, and then I can turn by hand or use a 12mm to loosen the adjusters. I'm going to do that on both sides. And now I'm ready to pull the axle out. Next step is going to be to pull the chain away from the sprocket. Which frees the wheel up. And as I remove the wheel, I'm going to make sure the caliper doesn't just drop down, the brake caliper. I'm going to hold that in position until I can get this rear wheel out. Now that I have the axle out, the wheel is free, I'm going to allow the motorcycle to lift back up. And what that did was give me the space under the fender to remove the wheel. Now we have the rear wheel removed. I want to show you that there is a spacer on the left side, on the drive side, and then there's a larger spacer on the brake side. Now, this is a 2022 SG. 2019 and later have a disc brake. On that brake side you have this larger spacer. And I also want to show you the sprocket carrier. We have a cush drive on this hub, the sprocket carrier. One part that tends to wear over time with use are these bolts that hold the sprocket on. And the stock ones come with these lock tabs, but after severe use, these bolts can stretch and wear, and you don't want to destroy your carrier. So we have an excellent upgrade. If you ever have your wheel off this far, it would be worth your while to purchase this kit. We've got a kit, this is for an RX3 rear wheel to hold the sprocket on, but these bolts have nylon lock nuts. So what you would do is remove the bolts that exist and the nuts that exist and the lock tabs. You're not going to reuse those locking tabs. You're just going to use the RX3 bolt and lock nut to hold the sprocket on your SG250. If you do want to utilize the RX3 sprocket bolts on your SG250, it's pretty easy. simply gonna tap down the lock tabs. And use a 13mm wrench or socket to loosen the nuts. And as you can see, the stock bolts slide right out. They have a flat side to them, and that's what holds it in place on that carrier. The RX3 bolt's got the hex head on it. But same thing, it's gonna fit where the flat side of one of those matches the hub. And then we can use our lock nut on the top. All right, now that all 4 bolts have been replaced, we're ready to reinstall our rear wheel. As we reinstall the rear wheel, one thing we want to take special note of is this slot in the bracket that holds the brake caliper. That slot has to align itself with this stay on the swing arm. It's very easy for that to come undone and be in the wrong position. If so, the first time the brakes are used, the caliper won't stay and will spin around and will cause damage. So you want to definitely make sure you've got that slot securely inside that stay. Okay, now we're ready to install the rear wheel. We're going to get things kind of in position. This is a bit of a juggling act. Now we have the rear wheel temporarily in place. I want to verify a few things. I want to make sure my axle adjuster is installed. The spacer on the left, the smaller spacer, the larger spacer on the right. I want to verify that the brake caliper, the pads are surrounding the disc. They're not to one side. And then I'll continue to keep an eye on that brake stay that comes off the swing arm. I want to make sure that slot stays in the right place. I'm going to utilize the jack once again to get things at the right position. And now is always a good time to put a little anti-seize on the axle itself, where the bearings are going to run. Now that we have the axle back in place, we can reinstall the nut, but leave it loose as we make the adjustment for our chain. I'm going to use my 12mm to turn the adjusters. And I can use the lines that are on the swing arm and match those with the markings on the adjusters. That's how I'm going to make sure that I'm adjusting consistently on each side and that that rear wheel stays square on the axle. One other tip when adjusting the chain on an SG250, if you have it on the center stand, the chain's going to show that it's looser than when it's sitting on its own weight, or even when the rider's sitting on the motorcycle. That's when it's at its tightest position. So keep that in mind. Sometimes it might benefit you to have it on the side stand or have someone hold it or sit on it to hold the weight so that you can have the chain at its tightest spot. It does call for 10 to 20 millimeters of play in the chain. And finally, we're going to adjust our axle nut and tighten that to approximately 40 foot-pounds. And then we're going to lock our adjusters in place with a 13 millimeter. And as you can see, we have approximately 18 millimeters of play in this chain right now. And we're within the specs, which are 10 to 20 millimeters. So we're good to go. And now, before we call this good, we want to verify that the brake is functioning properly. And also, while we have it on the bench, we can bench test the brake and also pump up the pressure. Right now, there's no brake pressure, so I'm gonna pump up the brake lever. Now we have stopping power. I'll check the rotation in both directions, and that helps me verify that the slot from the caliper bracket is properly aligned with the swing arm. It's in place, that brake stays working. It's not allowing the brake caliper to continue to move forward after the brake is applied. Thanks for joining us once again here at the CSC Garage. I enjoyed showing you just how easy it is to remove and reinstall the rear wheel on your SG250. Any of these parts can be purchased through the link below. Check out our website, and until next time, enjoy the ride.